Welcome to the BT SMSF Roundtable. I'm Darren Tyson-Chan, editor of Self-Managed Super, and I'll be moderating the session today. And joining me is Neil Sparks, who is the National Manager SMSF Strategy at BT Financial Group, Helen Dundon, who is a financial advisor with EL&C Baillieu, and Shari Neagle, an accountant with Bentleys, to discuss some very topical issues today. So thank you to the panel for joining us. One of the other very topical things at the moment is the FASEA standards. I don't think you can have a discussion about advice right now without that being raised. And in view of namely standards 5, 6 and 7, which revolve around best interests, clients' long goals and advisor remuneration, how would you tailor your advice to clients who are new to SMSFs with that or with those FASEA standards in mind? Maybe, Shari, you can continue and lead us off on this question.
Well, as an accountant, I am actually authorised to give advice on establishing a self-managed super fund, but obviously not every accountant is. The other consideration is that all parties need to be informed and have given consent. And historically, it's been driven by one family member who's roped in his spouse and possibly children. So I think that there is a responsibility of advisors to make sure all parties are aware of what responsibilities they're taking on, that they're not just responsible for the annual administration, but they're also responsible for the investments and making sure that there's sufficient cash flow to meet expenses, and that all the investments are done so in accordance with everybody's where they're at, whether they're in the accumulation phase or whether they're in the drawdown phase, because you can often find that there's a mismatch from a cash flow point of view. If there is a multi-generational fund, you might have the parents who are drawing down at a greater rate than the children are actually contributing, and there might not be sufficient earnings because it might be a direct property investment which has, a limited amount of rental because it has expenses that are on the back of that. So those are the sorts of things that need to be considered.
Neil, your thoughts?
So I think about standard 5. The client must understand the advice that's been given, and I wonder, how does an advisor capture that in a file? How on earth do you see in your file notes that the client has understood everything that it means to be the trustee of a self-managed super fund? So I think one of the important things from an advisor's perspective, from a process perspective, would be to direct clients or have evidence that you've directed clients to the ATO trustee resources and also the SMSF Association trustee resources, so that you can actually show that you took steps to show the client what resources are available to them to educate themselves as a trustee as part of your process of establishing and recommending a self-managed super fund for those people, which goes back to that comment I made earlier. Even though the client's asked for it, it doesn't remove the advisor's responsibility to talk through those issues. From a standard 6 perspective, the long-term repercussions for advice. From an advisor's perspective, is there really a choice, corporate trustee versus individual trustee? I think when we think long-term, it would have to be obvious that we really couldn't with all conscience recommend an individual trustee for a self-managed super fund. As Shari said, things happen a lot sooner than what you expect.
Just touching back on the Rice-Warner research, it potentially does open up SMSFs being a consideration for a larger group of people than traditionally was thought applicable. But as we've already discussed, we all know that they're not for everybody and they're not the right fit for everybody. And similarly, each trustee who eventually does run their own super fund under the SMSF label has their own way of going about how they actually manage the running of that fund. Helen, if I could direct this next question at you, in your experience, which client segments are typically more suited to being SMSF trustees, And then, which of these individuals is more suited to run their SMSF via a platform?
Sure. So the people who, after our discussions, we both agree it is the right thing for them to set up a self-managed super fund. They tend to be wanting to control their investments. For some reason, they're usually unhappy with where their superannuation is currently invested, for whatever reason that might be, and there's a variety of them. And so they're looking at what they have accrued over the last, whatever it might be, 10, 20 years, 30 years. And they're feeling they can do, with advice, they can do better. And so they're looking for some sort of control, really, over their retirement savings. I guess that's the number one factor that I see. They're also interested in how that money is invested, and it may well be because they have funds there and can purchase real estate with it, which they've always wanted to do, and this is one way of doing that. And particularly when it was easier to have the limited recourse borrowing arrangements, that was a huge area of growth for people looking for real estate, and it's not as easy now. But if you want real estate and you want it within your self-managed fund, or you want to use your superannuation funds for that, and you tick the other criteria, then a self-managed fund is quite helpful in that regard. But then there are other people who, and it's generally couples, and they're quite interested in looking after their own funds, but then you talk about the administrative side of it. So say it's a typical share portfolio with managed funds and with term deposits and with a bank account attached. That is a fairly typical self-managed super fund. And you then talk about what needs to be provided to Shari and the accountants at the end of each year so that your taxation can be completed and the audit if required. And this is where often you'll find that is not of interest to these people. They are getting close to retirement, or they're busy working, they're planning when they do retire, which in the next 5, 10, whatever years. They plan to travel. That's pre-COVID, obviously, and post-COVID, that's what will happen again. And so they do not wish to be receiving all of the emails or the mail that goes with that. Therefore, we then talk to them about a platform or a wrap account, because that is one way for them to be totally in control but not have to worry about the back admin. There is certainly a need for platforms within a self-managed super fund for particular clients, and they're the type of clients who I would recommend that we have a look at a platform.
Shari, from an accountant's or an accounting point of view, would you agree with that assessment?
There's definitely time savings where a trustee is running a fund that has a platform. It's not the only situation that we're faced with, but we are finding that there's certainly anyone who's receiving advice from an advisor. It makes sense for the advisor to have that oversight, but also it allows that cross communication between the advisor and the accountant, and then the client. So we have found technology has increased exponentially over the last few years, particularly when the software that we use has moved to the cloud, and the wrap providers and the banks are now sort of catching up to where the technology is at. So it makes the whole administration process a lot more streamlined. And we can definitely get cost savings for the clients that we pass on where there is that efficiency achieved.
Neil, Helen did touch on the importance of control being a factor in motivating people to start an SMSF in the first place. And sometimes that desire of control doesn't necessarily mean that their mindset would turn towards using a platform with their SMSF. Do you think there are greater benefits to running an SMSF via a platform that are not necessarily being considered all the time?
Yeah, it's a great question, Darren. I think it certainly goes beyond cost. So both Helen and Shari have talked about pricing and features and so on. And now it really does come to some of those intangible things. So there's a responsibility for trustees to retain certain documents and information for periods of 5 and 10 years. modern platforms like BT, for example, have a document library for the self-managed super fund. We didn't just make it so that we're keeping information on there. Advisors, accountants, auditors can all access that platform and load important documents such as the trust deed, the declaration and consent, those important sort of taxation documents, and store them on the platform. So it's beyond your traditional investment and transactional, cash and buying shares and so on, right down to now helping with the compliance and administration of the fund. And I think the other piece is it's the data. So we always talked about data downloads. You've got to be a bit broader when you're asking, does your platform data download? Because it might be that you're dumping a bunch of information into an Excel spreadsheet that you have to chop up to input it into your accounting software, as opposed to a data feed that's being done through an API, where the two systems are open and talking to each other through security protocols and transporting information between them overnight, every night.
Okay, turning our attention to another statistical trend, which has been probably happening for a little while now. There has been an increase in establishments by younger individuals, and I think Helen already touched on this a little bit, as well as women. Shari, has this been your experience, and what do you think might be driving this trend, or these two trends?
I haven't actually seen any evidence of it, but I have some suspicions. So my suspicions are that the fact that there's more women setting up self-managed super funds is possibly because of divorce. So where there is a couple that might be in the fund, but because they've both been involved over time, the woman wants to retain the fund.
Helen, if we do examine this younger client segment, in terms of service and the integration of technology when it comes to running an SMSF, what do they expect?
So they're really, it's varied, I'd have to say. But because the ones I see really are looking for advice, I do believe that there are a number being set up online, and they're really looking after it themselves using tech and making their own decisions. So I believe there would be quite a few of those that I don't personally get to see. The ones I do get to see are looking for very low-cost investments, so ETFs, exchange-traded funds, across the board. That is what they're looking for, and then it will be what their interest is. So there's an exchange-traded fund called Ethy, which is an ethical one. So that's what they invest in, and it's very low cost. There's one called gold, so if you want to invest in gold. So they're very easily named as well to make it. So it's very, very simple. But I'm finding that younger clients setting up self-managed super funds, looking for equity investments, are looking to do it through exchange-traded funds. They're looking for the low cost. They're often doing it themselves as well, because they can do some sort of online platform, and it's much cheaper for them as a percentage, because they may well not be at that $200,000 mark. But others who have got, I guess, higher cash flow often are looking for the advice. So they'll go to their accountant, they'll go to their advisor and start it up with a lower balance and then make reasonable contributions to put themselves in a position to expand what they're investing in. But it's interesting, there really is there's a huge push towards ethical investing or socially responsible investing for sure.
Neil, do you have anything to add as far as the technology piece goes for what some of those younger SMSF trustees might be looking for?
And from a technology perspective, Darren, to me, the younger demographic, everything's on their phone. Their whole world is on their smartphone. So if you're not participating in that arms race of tablet technology, I think you're behind the eight ball right from the outset. So we sort of promote BT along the lines of, we've got an award-winning app on BT Panorama. Effectively, if you are connected to the internet and you have your device in front of you, you can run your self-managed super fund. You can upload documents, you can trade and transact on the markets, you can buy term deposits, you can pay your bills using bill pay anyone. So effectively, we feel that we've delivered to the needs of that younger demographic, that smartphone sort of demographic, to give them the ability to operate their self-managed super fund from the palm of their hand.